I recognize a lot of faces in here, and some faces I don't recognize, so I'll give you a brief. I live down in Felch, Michigan, down there in UP, Ralph. Most people know where Ralph is, a Hunter Bar. If you are a Youper, is that the band, the Youpers? You listen to their music, which I do all the time because I love them. I live down by Ralph by Hunter's Bar. So I'm married. I have 2 grown daughters, and I have 1 grandson. And like I said earlier, they're playing. I also have a house in Nebraska because my daughter had a kid and then moved back to Nebraska, and then we travel back and forth between Nebraska all the time and here. So that's basically who I am today. I'm retired. I'm loving it, being a granddad most of the time. I spend most of my time in Nebraska. But now let me take you back 30 years ago. 30 years ago, I was a major in the Air Force. I was chief of training flight and bomber squadron. At that point in my life, I was at the Pentagon. I was moving up. I don't know how many veterans we have. Not a veteran. I was moving up. I hit that peak. You know, the summer in 1988, I was a deployed commander. I was ops officer for 3 weeks. Deployed site, bombers, tankers. I did all that. My wife and I were tasked with hosting a primary function on the base. So we were being groomed to become a squadron commander. I was going to be on the below the zone list for lieutenant colonel. I was on the bomb SACS squadron commander list. In a year, I was going to be a squadron commander or an ops officer someplace, probably down at Worcester Air Force Base. So to me, my career was going up like this. My kids were 7 and 9. I had a beautiful wife, and everything was going great for me. Okay? And you know, sometimes that always doesn't happen. So what we're going to talk about is what really happened. But in order to get you in the mood, we're going to see something here that doesn't belong to me, but belongs to NASA. To put you in the right frame of mind. So, just what the language is.
I hear music. Is that the mood? Is that the mood you want us in?
The music? There you go.
Okay, let's see. Technical differences. I have a lead.
Music's pretty beautiful.
Oh, okay, I'll push the play button.
Try that?
Oh, he's going up to take care of the music.
Genius.
No, Larry's the genius. He figured it out.
Okay, technical differences.
Nah. There we go. Thank you.
Gotta tap the arrow on the bottom.
Yeah, we
Okay,
tried that.
hit.
Showing is playing.
Okay, hold on a second. Let's see if I have it on.
Look at that plane. Isn't that a gorgeous plane?
Is that a 260 or a 250?
How'd you get the
That's a 180.
Just think of the photographer that took that picture.
Perfect. He's the
Jeez.
best photographer in the world.
Well, I was actually hoping for the 400. I was actually hoping for a 400.
Oh, well, I'm gonna put it up for sale, so.
Okay,
Alright.
technical differences. What I have
They're gonna
is I
sell
had
it. They're gonna
a
sell it.
1984 NASA picture of a 4-engine jet crash to try to set you into the right mood. But instead, you'll just have to look at this picture.
The fuel test. The fuel test, yes.
That's what we'll be talking about today. December 6th, 1988 crash with the B-52 at KI Sawyer, which I was an instructor pilot. First, if anybody's been in a major accident in their life or a major event in your life, you know you have different participants, right? For me, it's my spouse, and I just threw that picture in there because I told her I'd always do that. I like that picture of my wife. There's the heroes, people who pulled us out of the bomber, or in anybody's case, a policeman, a fireman, or somebody like that. There's the survivors, and we all survived. That was the only picture I had of us all together. Well, we weren't all together. Two of the other pilots, the 2 pilots were in 2 different hospitals, and so they weren't there, and there was another guy who was in a hospital in another location, and he wasn't in that picture also. That's the aircraft that we're flying, Balls 40. In the military, anything that starts with 00 is called Balls, was Balls 40. And the nickname of this baby was the Black Widow. And I'm happy to say that nobody was made a widow that day. So what happened? On December 8th, we went on a mission, a night mission. We took off, went and flew low level. We did air refueling, flew low level. There were 8 people on board. This was a crew with 2 co-pilots. I was on board as the instructor pilot, because one of the co-pilots had to get qualified at night low level TA, which means you fly at 400 feet doing about 400 knots. And we weren't wearing night vision goggles that night, but I had to go qualify him in that. We came back into the pattern, and we're doing a series of touch and goes and a series of approaches. I'll be back. We're doing a series of approaches, and so I'm going to handle this 2 ways, really. I'm going to talk about the accident itself, and then I'm going to talk about my personal experience. And I do that at the end because my personal experience is very hard. I know if you guys have a major event in your life, it's really hard to talk about it sometimes. So on this incident here, we were doing a touch and go. As we landed the aircraft, going down the runway, the back end of the aircraft started exploding. The female in the tower hit the crash net right away. At the same time, there was a water truck being changed over at 1:10 in the morning at the fire department. So crash 11 was sitting outside waiting to get the water truck transferred in from Gwynn. As we were going down the runway, the aircraft was continuing to explode, but any of you who've flown in an airline or any big plane, as you're going down the runway, you bounce around a lot. Okay? And the supervisor flying had watched us land, but then he turned his attention to a tanker on final, so he wasn't paying attention to what was going on with us. And the female in the tower had already hit the crash net and was trying to talk to people even before we got back airborne. So as we're going down the runway, the aircraft is exploding. As we take off, the co-pilot calls for gear. Aircraft commander starts raising the gear handle. We're about 50 feet in the air doing 165 knots when the aircraft exploded. And then we came down. My initial thought was, damn, we hit a snowplow. Because you see that bright yellow light, you know, and that's what I related to that. And the co-pilot luckily kept the wings level. As we came down, the gear, we bounced on the gear and the fuselage. The nose, as you can see in this picture here, we hit way back here. So we're more than 3,000 feet, or more than half a mile. We hit right here, and those were the engine nacelles hitting. As we hit the ground, the tail section blew off the aircraft. In fact, it actually blew off the aircraft before we hit the ground. And we came down and started sliding down the runway. The crew compartment separated from the wings. And we were down like a sled, just sliding down the runway, doing 165 knots. And the whole bottom of this compartment was just grinding off. The wings, luckily for us, hit something here and turned backwards. And what we did not do, or what we did not think to do, because the time was really fast, the throttles were up to military power. So these engines were still cooking. The engines turned around and the whole wing went 180 degrees and started sliding backwards down the runway. And then they hit something right here, and the wings turned back around and started going forward again until they came to rest right here, which is only 50 feet from the crew fuselage. If that wing had not turned twice, this wing that had 30,000 pounds of fuel in it, or roughly 5,000 gallons of gas, would have slammed right into us and killed us instantly. Or at least we hope instantly. But it didn't. So it dissipated all that energy, and it came to a stop here. Okay. That was at 1:11 in the morning. 1:09 in the morning. The fire department was over here, crash 11, responded right away because they saw us exploding on the runway even before we got airborne. And they said all they could see, well, they started coming out because they knew we were landing down here. So they started responding right away. And everybody else in there in the fire department was asleep. Well, I'll take it back. There were some guys playing poker, but they wouldn't admit to it. But everybody else woke up, got in their vehicles, and came out. And when they came out, and you know the fire department out there, they come out the side, right? Some of them do. When they came out, all they saw was over 4,000 feet of flames on the runway. They had no idea where we were or what was going on. All they knew was that they were crash. So they initially turned and started going north. because they thought they were landing to the north. When they went to bed, they were landing to the north, and we were landing to the south. The female in the tower contacted them and said, no, you're going the wrong way. They're landing to the south. So they started coming up here. When they came up here, they assumed that we were all dead. And the first crash vehicle got up and started coming in to the area. And this whole area here was nothing but a big ball of flames, including fuselage. All outside was just burning. So, well, let me go to another slide. Pause for a second. This is the culprit. This is what happened. This fuel pump right here, which is located in these aft tanks here in the forward aft tank. This pump here had a little flange on it, looked like this, and it had a little cover plate that was supposed to be on it. The plane came out of depot maintenance a few weeks earlier, and they did not put that little flange on it. And what that little flange did was, when a fuel pump overheats to 645 degrees, the circuit breaker is supposed to pop, because JP4 ignites at 645. The circuit breaker did not pop. It popped on the flight before our flight. The maintenance couldn't find anything wrong with it. So I was monitoring that pump, that circuit breaker, the whole flight. For 8 hours I was watching it. Every 15 minutes you do a cruise station check. I would check that circuit breaker. It still didn't pop. So what happened was, as we accelerated, and we had done, this is our 4th approach. So, and when the approach before this was a low approach. So you can imagine if we were 200 feet in the air when this happened instead of 50 feet. What happened was the fuel sloshes to the back of the tank, and what's left in the tank? Vapors. Vapors is what exploded and ignited. The vapors came down into this thing through the open flange and ignited. This fuel pump blew up this tank and then went straight down, impacted on the ground and the runway, and that's how they realized it was the fuel pump initially. And then it blew up this tank here, and it blew up the mid-tank right here behind the wings. And then it said, well, what am I going to blow up next? So it went in and blew up this tank, and then it blew up this tank. When this tank blew up right here, that's when we were 50 feet in the air, and that's when the whole back end of the plane came up. And these are the pieces. This is the section here that came off, and I'll show a picture of all these. This section came off on itself with the gear. It broke right here, and then it broke right here behind the crew compartment. So it had this one piece here. And a design feature in the B-52, which no one knew about, I didn't know about, I've been flying B-52s for 14 years, was they had a like wing spar, but they had a body spar that went from here all the way back to here in that plane. The crew compartment was not part of that wing spar. So when we hit the ground, our gear was down. It was starting to come up, so we hit the ground sort of like this. That's a pretty good picture. We hit the ground, they figure sort of like this. Would just be in the ground. So the gear would here started to collapse and then broke off the crew compartment, and that's what kept us alive. If we would hit at any other different angle, or if the gear would have been up further, we would have crushed forward. If the gear would have been down, we probably would have bounced. But it didn't. It hit the right angle. So good thing we started to put the gear up. The gear was left down. We would have bounced back up in the air. But the crew compartment came off and then just slid down the road. And there's that tail section. I showed this picture. It's one of my favorite pictures. That's the drag chute. In a B-52, you have a drag chute. So when the rear end blew off, that wire, all the wires are still connected until they separated, and then one of the wires happens to be the drag chute. So that's one of the things they asked us. Why did you guys deploy your drag chute? Well, we didn't deploy the drag chute. Stupid. You know, I'm an engineer by learning, by education, I guess, not by life experiences. But so, if you've ever been in an accident, sometimes, if you're especially an aviation accident, sometimes you think they ask awful silly questions. Same thing if you're in an auto accident. So coming back to this, you see the marks down here. The fire department showed up. The first guys came up and they were wearing their Crash 11. 2 guys came running into here, and they just assumed, you know, everybody was dead. So they were still looking around to see what was happening when the chief showed up, they set up a perimeter. At this time, by this time, this is only 2 minutes later, which is pretty impressive, I mean, when you figure how far we were out there. So they got in there and the chief said, station your fire trucks around this way, and station the fire trucks around this way. All he wanted to do was contain the fire at that time. Again, he assumed we were dead. In fact, he made a radio call saying he probably needs more body bags because he doesn't have enough. He only has 3 in his truck, and he said, go find me more body bags. Then one of the guys in Crash 11 decided to walk up after they phoned the crew compartment here, and they didn't know really what this was when they first pulled up. All they know was a ball of fire. So they put down foam on this thing here, and then he said, oh, well, that looks like a crew compartment, so he started walking up to the plane. And this is what he saw. Now this hatch was blown a little bit because as we hit the ground, the co-pilot had the presence of mind to rotate his arming handles. So an ejection seat is 2 cycles in the B-52. One you rotate, which lifts, shoots the bolts here, which lifts that up to the airstream and takes that hatch away. And then you release that, and then you squeeze the triggers, and that's what fires your rockets to have your seat go up. All he did was rotate, because he figured as they were sliding down the runway and making all that noise, that he needed a way to get out. Okay? And this is the rope that he used to get out. Obviously, he didn't use that. So this hatch was popped, and this window was not open. This window was only open this far. Okay. And what the co-pilot did is he could see them coming up, but he didn't see them recognize that anybody was alive. So he stuck his fingers out that window and just started wiggling his fingers as hard as he could. And the fire guy come walking up, saw the fingers wiggling, and realized that we were alive. So he ran back and told them that there were people who were alive inside the aircraft, or inside the fuselage. I show this because as you look at that other picture, there's no way in. I mean, the window wasn't open, the hatches weren't up. They ran around the back here, and then the B-52, on the downstairs, you have a door that opens up. It goes into a crawl space out to the wheel well. That door is over here. So when you initially look at this, there's no way in. Except for, right up here, behind this screen, I don't have a picture, there was a hole about this big where the gunner's equipment was that it got pulled out when the aircraft separated. So they had a hole right back up here that was open. Okay. When they ran around the plane, they couldn't see anybody, they couldn't see any way to get in except for the radar navigator had already managed to crawl out to that hole. The gunner was still inside, but the radar navigator, who had a dangling leg at the time because his leg was broken, was crawling out of this hole when they saw him coming out of the hole, so now they knew how to get in. So the rescue guys went inside, and what was going on was this was still burning. We were burning inside downstairs. Okay, we had 3 fires going on downstairs. The navigator had already exhausted 2 fire extinguishers as he was pinned downstairs underneath his equipment. And he had 2 fire extinguishers that he had already used to try and get out and put the fire out, but still burning inside. So now, they knew we were alive, and the fire chiefs realized that's one big fire here. This was a big raging fire still. So what he did is he took the 2 fire trucks, the 2 extinguisher trucks, and put one here and one over here, assuming that when this blew, that they would take the brunt of the force instead of us, because we're only 50 feet away. They figured that this blew, because it was all burning down here, all the fuel was leaking and burning. They figured if this blew, it would just roll us over and kill us. So they put their fire trucks in there between them, put their lives in danger to save us. And then they got into the back. The gunner got out at that time, and then the 2, guy named Kroeger and I can't remember the other guy's name. He works up at the Mount Huron Resort, whatever that resort is up there.
The Mountain Club? The Mountain Club?
The Mount Huron Mountain Club, yeah. He works up there. They crawled inside the fuselage and then found the crew members. The radar navigator stayed outside. The co-pilot, who I was there training that night, went out and came back in and helped them because there was so much smoke and fire still in here that they figured they couldn't get everybody out. EW was crushed into his equipment on the side. He had his femur sticking out of his body. His jaw was busted. And he screamed an awful lot. But, so the co-pilot came in, the extra co-pilot came and disconnected the hatch. If you would have taken that hatch and pulled it up, you could have ignite a charge. So he disconnected that hatch and he disconnected the hatch from EW so they could get us out through those two hatches. The navigator managed to free himself, got up. He got out. The extra co-pilot was asked to get out also, so that just left EW, who they then extracted out through his hatch, and then they extracted myself next out through that hatch, and then the co-pilot they took out through this hatch, and they took the aircraft commander out to that hatch. They put me on a longboard, they put the pilot and co-pilot on two short boards, and pulled them up out of these hatches, and then lowered them down to people who wouldn't get down. But that took over an hour to get us out of the aircraft. The last three of us out of the aircraft. So I was very impressed with the fire department. They did a pretty good job. So, and that's basically it for the crash itself. Just a silly fuel pump, ignites, you get airborne, blows up. Some of the side notes of this crash was they let me into the room where they did the accident investigation, but they searched me for any pencils, pens, papers, because they were going to let me look at everything they had in the accident investigation room, but they didn't want me to take anything out, so they searched me as I left. And one of the things in there was a note from the 4-star General Sack saying, "I want to bury this crew." Because before this, remember that a month before, we had guys on a tanker that went down to Worsman, crashed at Worsman, killed the crew, but the 5 people from Sawyer managed to jump out of that plane and get out before that plane was engulfed in flames. They lost the B-1 just a month before also, down at Dias. So the SAC commander was mad and wanted someone to pay. And he was going to make us pay. And that was a note from him, and make us pay, except for the guy who I was flying for was the chief of safety. He got home the next day, or he got home on Monday. Went with the wing commander and they walked down the runway, and as they got past this burn mark here, they thought they were done, and he said, "Let me go look farther down the runway," and he went farther down the runway and he says, "I see something there." And it was a fuel pump sitting embedded in the concrete on the runway. He told the wing commander, "I now know what caused this accident. It was a fuel pump explosion." Because he said, "I just finished up my course down at Eglin, and the last thing we did was a plane explosion caused by a fuel pump." You may know these fuel pumps. They were on KL 800, the flight out of Washington, the one that blew up in Washington, that they expect was a fuel pump explosion. Same fuel pump that we had. There was also on a tanker that blew up in Alaska, and then a month after us, they lost that tanker up at Loring, Maine in a pattern, same fuel pump. So after our accident, they grounded the entire bomber fleet, because our fuel pumps are electric, the tanker fuel pumps are hydraulic, so they didn't think they had a problem, so that tanker, they lost that tanker. The other side note is we had also changed fuel sequences on the bomber so that they could save money, because as you change your shift, your CG, you save a little bit of fuel. And so we were on a new fuel sequencing, which had us in the pattern with fuel in that aft tank. We normally would not have fuel in that aft tank. Of course, that doesn't mean this plane wouldn't have blown up sometime later. So I guess we were lucky that it blew up with us that close to the ground versus somebody in the pattern. And but that did not make it in my accident report. This is the accident report here. If you're ever in a military accident, this is how thick the report is. And this isn't the complete report either, so it's just got everything you need to know in there. One of the things when I read through that was very interesting, that I was on drugs. I was on heavy doses of some kind of painkiller. And, but they explained that in the next paragraph that, that was administered at the site.
I'm sure you were, but.
Yeah. So, okay, the pilots, both the pilots and I were all on drugs. So, that's interesting. I got a lot of stories I can tell on that, so. So now the personal part of this accident. I mean, there was a lot of things on that, the physical accident itself. The personal part for me is, this is where this is how many people we had on board. We had 8 people on board. We had an extra co-pilot in the 10th man position in the bunk. I was sitting in the IPC between the 2 pilots. There's the 10th man bunk. That co-pilot received the Omaha Trophy that year. We're going back into a burning fuselage of open sky. He only sustained 1 injury, and that was the broken eardrum. He was laying down in the bunk here, and there was a comm kit. And when we hit the ground at 25 Gs, is what we hit the ground at basis, right? That comm kit came and hit him in the side of the head. Even though he had a helmet on, it still broke his eardrum, and that was his only injury. So what happened from from being inside the cockpit, this is what you don't hear a lot about. I was watching them do their landing. I didn't have a parachute on. I had a helmet on. I had that helmet on. As an instructor pilot, you weren't required to wear a parachute. And all B-52 crashes, only 1 instructor pilot survived. And that was me. Okay, out of all the B-52 crashes where they did not bail out. I'll take it back. 2, because there was another one where they broke off like this down the right path and sliding down the runway. So I never wore a parachute. I figured by the time I got downstairs and jumped out, it was so bad, I didn't have time to put a parachute on. It wasn't going to make any difference. So I was sitting in there. I had the 10th guy looking over my shoulder as we came in and do the touch and go. I was checking out the pilot on allowing co-pilots to do touch and go. So the co-pilot was doing the touch and go. We touched down. Everything was normal. Like I said, you're bouncing around, you're jiggling around. So I had my hand mic so I could talk, and I had it attached to my lanyard on my flight suit. So I just let that go. I leaned back in my seat, and I turned around and told the 10th man, go ahead and sit back down again, get strapped back in. And we started to take off. The co-pilot advanced the throttles. We took off, getting up in the air, and he told the pilot to raise the landing gear, and when he did that, that's when the plane exploded. We saw the big flash. I was looking out at the lights over at the alert facility, and those lights were moving down fast. I knew we were going to crash, so I'd already leaned back like this, so I was trying to grab my mic to tell the crew to bail out. I reached down, undid my seatbelt, and I grabbed the mic. At the same time, I was reaching over the co-pilot seat to grab the yoke so I could tell them to bail out, realizing that if the co-pilot bailed out, he would sever my arm. But I figured I was dead anyway. And that's real fast thinking, But anyway, so I was reaching over, and I was reaching over the co-pilot seat when we hit the ground at 25 Gs. So instantaneously, it took my chest and snapped my chest in 2, and broke my ribs, injured my liver, all the organs I had inside my body, knocked me unconscious, took my helmet, my mask, took the blow on the back of the co-pilot seat here, just snapped that in 2 and just pushed it right back in my face. The blade went up to the side of my skull. And I thought that was bad. And then I bounced back into my seat and I broke my back in 5 places. So I broke it at T7, T8, T12, L1, and L2. L2 was a burst fracture. I also was 50% occluded, which means my spinal column shifted over like that. So it was shifted over 50%. I was knocked unconscious. I woke up when we were on the ground. All I could hear was people screaming and fire and yelling and stuff. But I couldn't feel my lower extremities. I couldn't feel anything from the waist down. And then I realized that every time I breathed, it was like someone stabbing me with a knife. So breathing in was this pain in my chest, and breathing out was a pain in my back. So I tried to move. I tried to talk to the 10th man, came over to talk to me and talk to me. And I thought I was talking to him, but they said they couldn't hear anything I was saying. And that was because I was gurgling blood, spitting up blood. I had blood coming in my nose, my mouth, my ears, my eye. Then I tried to move. I said, oh, I'm gonna, I don't want to die here. Because I figured, things go through your mind right away. And I remember I had 2 friends that were on a bomber at Mather that crashed. And everybody tried to go downstairs, and the fuel tank ruptured, drowned in the fuel. And so my first thought was, we gotta get a hatch open, we gotta get out of here. I tried to move, but I couldn't feel my legs. So I fell behind the co-pilot seat, and there's 2 little drones, one behind the co-pilot, not 2, there's one round circular device sitting there. And I fell down behind that, and I couldn't move. So I was sitting there concentrating on breathing, and then I looked to the back of the fuselage, and all I saw was fire. So I told myself, I'm not gonna burn to death tonight. So I took my glove off, I pushed back my sleeve, and I braced my hand like this, and I said, as soon as the flame hits my hand, I'm gonna die. I'm just gonna quit breathing, I'm gonna die. That thought is what saved me, because when those 2 guys came up on the fuselage, the first guy went right by me. He didn't see me back in the corner, back wedged behind the co-pilot seat. The second guy came up and bumped into my hand. So he saw me, and he pulled me out and looked at me and laid me down in that crew compartment area. They cleaned out a spot. And this is all, I don't know how many minutes, but he laid me down there and kept on talking to me. The guy was 19 years old, that's all I remember. And he kept on slapping me in the face, telling me to stay awake, because he didn't want me to go to sleep. And then he rolled me on my side so I could spit up blood and stuff. And then they eventually got me out. So, let's see, broken back in 5 places, a busted chest, busted ribs. Oh, and I forgot one thing. I mean, all my internal organs were bruised. I bruised my heart, I bruised the muscle around my heart. And I don't know if you medical people in here, but what happens is that muscle around your heart expands and contracts, and then you go into cardiac arrest. So, I sprained my right ankle. I really didn't sprain my right ankle. It was the nerves endings were shot in my back, so I could feel pain in my ankle. But that's the only thing I could feel from the waist down. So they got me out of that. Like I said, it took them an hour to get me out. They took me out to the EW hatch. I don't remember that. I'm not sure that at all. I was in and out of consciousness the whole time. They put me in the ambulance. They took me to the base hospital along with the EW, and he was still screaming. So they got me to the base hospital, and they didn't even take me inside. The doctors came out and looked at me and said, there's nothing we can do for that guy. Send him to Marquette. Because they realized they had, at that time, they had 7 other guys that were injured, or 6 people that were injured, and they were working on them, because they couldn't work on me at the base hospital. They didn't have the capability to do that. So they were working on fixing a broken leg, they were fixing a broken arm. So they looked at the EW and they said, us 2, and they said, take these guys down to downtown. And then this story now, my wife and I disagreed on. They opened up the ambulance, and my wife was there, and she came in, and I swore she slapped me and told me to move my damn legs. I think it was a drug stock. Because they had me on a neck brace. I was covered in blood, and I was covered in hydraulic fluid. It looked like I was bleeding everywhere because I was totally red. And she said she didn't say that. She didn't slap me. She didn't say not to tell me. She did say she told me to move my legs. She's not here to defend herself today. I'm sorry. We have squirrels in our house and up here, so she had to stay home. We got a guy coming down. As a side note for her, we lived on Canberra, 247 Canberra, which is the last house before 06 housing. My wife had injured her legs, and so she was laid up in bed and injured her knee. So everybody on base woke up because of the crash. So my wife was sitting there, and she started seeing these cars go by our house so fast. You know, Alpha, Delta, Bravo, all these guys, all the colors on base. So she couldn't figure out what was going on. So then she remembered I had a monitor, a scanner in my den. So she went in the den and got the scanner, and she turned it on, and they were still talking about body bags at that time. That's what she heard that, and she goes, and then she heard somebody say 8. So she goes, well, that can't be Will, because, you know, the crew has 6 people, and he makes 7. So there must be a tanker. And then cars were driving by. She called the neighbor and asked what happened. The neighbor said they didn't know. So then she goes, well, wait a minute, she says, let me go look at the crew roster, crew was flying with. So she went and looked at the crew roster and she saw that there were 7 people in there. So she pretty much figured right then and there that I was probably one of the people. So she called around and they told her, yeah, it was a bomber crash, but they weren't too sure who was on it yet. And then they came and got my wife, a friend of ours did, and took her to the squadron. And the squadron told her, he's okay. She's sitting there with the pastor, not our pastor, but a pastor, and each squadron has a pastor. And squadron commander is sitting there, and he says, well, I just got word that he's okay, he's up moving, he's walking around. And yeah, you know, typical miscommunication. And so she said, okay, and then they said, well, he's at the base hospital. So you want to go see him? So she goes, yeah, I want to go see him. So she and the squadron commander jumped in the car and drove to the hospital. And she ran in there and said, where's my husband? They said, he's not here. And they said, he's out in that ambulance out there. So that's when she first saw him. She was told that I was up walking around and I was okay and I was talking to her. And then she opens the ambulance door and sees me covered in blood, body, you know, neck brace on, and I could move my legs, but I told her I couldn't feel my legs. And then she took off and she followed me to the hospital downtown in Marquette. So I get down to the hospital in Marquette and they pulled me in, and the first thing they do is cut you off and strip you. And I have low blood pressure, so it was a good thing my wife was there, because the first thing they did was they put my blood pressure on, and my blood pressure was low, so they thought I was crashing. So they're gonna dope me up or something, I don't know what it was. And my wife told him no, that he normally has low blood pressure. When he sleeps, he gets real low. And so they didn't believe her initially, and then she told him, I'm a nurse, don't you do that. And so they didn't do it. But they got me there, they put me into the CAT scan, and then they put me into a room. Oh, I forgot. In the ER, they were sticking a tube up my nose. They're trying to stick a tube up my right side, but it's not very good. So they started kicking up my left side, and I told the nurse I wouldn't love her anymore, and my wife said that's when she knew I was going to be okay. They stick that tube up, and all they got out was blood. Then they stick a tube in your other orifices, and all they got out was blood. So they did the CAT scan, they put me in a room, and then they told my wife, that's all we're going to do tonight. And if he's alive in the morning, we'll figure out what to do next. So, and then I don't know if it was the drugs, but they had me in a room, it was dark, they had a spotlight on my chest, and they had an X on my chest. And I think that X was there so that when you go into cardiac arrest, they could take a needle and stab it into the muscle around the heart and pull the blood out to stop. So I thought that was very annoying. They didn't tell me that, but there was a needle sitting there on the table next to me. Again, it could have been addressed. Needless to say, I didn't die, which is good. So,
What year was this?
1988.
How old were you?
36. So they took me, and they brought me back to the base, but they didn't move me for a week, which was the bad news, because my spine was occluded that whole time. And just 2 months after my accident, they discovered that if you shoot up the spine with lidocaine, if you shoot the spine up with that one, they have an occlusion, that the long-term results are better. You're not, right, because I still didn't feel anything below my waist. They put me in there, and then they sent me down the right path, and they operated on me down the right path. So I was in a body cast for 6 months. This is a small version of my body cast. I had them drill the holes in it because I run hot, and I needed. So when I got down to the VA in Chicago, they put the holes in it for me. And these are all the signatures of the guys. We had a reunion 5 years ago up here, the trash guys, and but they operated on my back. They fixed my back. They put 2 rods in my back. They fixed all my vertebrae except for one. They didn't do anything with T7, and I still have back pain from that. But they did operate on that. There was so much to fix that they never caught that. Then I had to go through physical therapy because I had to learn how to walk without feeling my lower extremities. And if you don't think about that, think when you have a foot that falls asleep and get up and try and walk. And think, you know, I would run into stuff and cut my legs. And my wife would say, you gotta watch your feet. So I'm like this, you know, I can walk like this. I'm walking like a 16-month-old kid, right? When I first started walking, I walk with her head down or something like that. So I had to do that. My extremities are a lot better now. They told me what I would get in 2 years would be all that I would get, but that's wrong. I'm still getting more function back all the time. I still don't feel temperature on my feet. In fact, just 5 years ago, I dropped a 5-gallon bucket of paint on my big toe, and my toe broke up like that. So I just had to reset my toe, taped it to the other toe, and because I didn't feel it. There are advantages. You know, I still can't bend that toe.
Will has this little thing, he makes money every spring and fall, where just before the ice goes off or goes on, he goes into the lake and nobody believes he can do it.
Yeah. My wife fell for that for years. We had a place up on Farmers Lake over here in Little Lake. And in fact, Walt Kyle, the soccer coach, he bought it from us in the 90s. When you guys decided to raise the taxes on non-local residents. Oh, when the state did not change. But, so it has its advantages. So, I mean, I've frozen keys to my pocket, you know, when it's outside. I've stabbed myself with a saw, a bandsaw. My daughter was up in a tree. I was going to get the saw, and we had music playing, so I was going da 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 like that. And she was yelling at me, you know, but I'm still listening to music, and then I stopped, and I realized I've been jamming that bandsaw into my leg, you know, and so if I did that today, I would feel that. So I think that's basically it. As far as the crew members, the aircraft commander and co-pilot had the same burst fracture at L2 that I did. The pilot is a paraplegic. The co-pilot has reverse problems from what I did. I had neurogenic bowel bladder, which meant I had no control. The co-pilot was opposite. He couldn't go. He couldn't force himself to go. They were medically retired. I was medically retired also. They sent me down to Hines in Chicago. And if you're a vet and you ever go to Chicago and someone says go to Hines VA, go to the emergency room, don't do it. Go someplace else. It was a pretty sad place. They put me on a spinal cord unit there, which is the most depressing place I've ever been in my life. Anybody watch that movie Born on the 4th of July? Tom Cruise, remember that scene in the VA hospital? Yeah. I was in there with guys back 3 or 4 times in that time VA. You know, that's just a terrible place to be. And my roommate was Charles Manson. He wasn't really Charles Manson, he looked like Charles Manson.
Well, did he act like a door?
He did.
Oh, God.
My first night there, I got in, I had my body cast on, and the nurses came. I had a blow tube. I blew into the tube. They asked them to come help me. They came and removed the tube. They didn't help me. And that was the night nurses at the VA in Chicago. So you didn't want anything to happen to
That
you.
place has been famous for that.
Yeah.
For years.
The day nurses were great. The evening nurses were great. It's the night nurses that were not. Charlie Manson drank a lot. I don't remember his name. I just called Charlie. He drank a lot one night, and I was telling him maybe he shouldn't drink, so he threw the bottle at me. I then managed to get in my cast myself, and I walked over to him, and I reminded him that I was a walker and he was not. And I reminded him that he had long hair and he liked to smoke. And I reminded him that as he lit his cigarettes, he always did this. And I would assist him sometimes, and I always reminded him that sometimes that lighter could just go right up to his hair. And he took the lesson to heart. He let me alone after that.
So who was the real Charlie Manson?
That's true. Right there. Yeah, it was a different world going in there, so.
So how long was the recovery back to some degree of normalcy?
I was in that cast for 6 months. I had to go down right path. They took off the right path, and I spent the first day laying down in the museum. I took my kids to the museum down there, and all I did was lay down on the bench because I wasn't used to not having that.
Yeah.
It was bigger then. I wasn't used to having that.
I would
on.
imagine your strength would go.
Yeah, and you had to feel, I weighed 160 pounds by the time I got out of the hospital, I was 125. So, and then learning how to walk again and do stuff again. I would say I did physical therapy for 2 years, walking and getting on a bike. When we were back here before we moved, I would go to the gym. In fact, some of that equipment that was in the gym was because of me, because I went in there and the wing commander, Jors, asked me what I needed for because they had the regular weights, and I couldn't do that. So they ordered a lot of Nautilus stuff for me and put that in that gym so I could use that Nautilus. So, which is intimidating, having that on, and then having the bodybuilders in there who don't, where's my mirror? I'm gonna go do a weight, here's 5 pounds. So, but I would say, well, for the first 2 years, I could not get out of bed without 3,200 milligrams of motion. I would have that next to my bed in the morning and would take that before I got out of bed, because I couldn't move.
Did you say 3,200?
3,200 milligrams of motion. I'm a walking specimen of how much you can take in Tryptophan and how much you can take in Motrin and still not mess up your body. Motrin,
You and Keith Richards.
yeah, Motrin to me was like candy, because the pain was always there.
Do you still have?
No, I for 2 years I did that, and then I went to a chiropractor. I asked the VA to see a chiropractor, and they wouldn't do it. And back then, in the 90s. And so I went to a chiropractor on my own, and 2 years after seeing him, I still take meloxicam, 15 milligrams of meloxicam a day, but that's all I take. So I can't stand long, I can't bend over for long periods of time. So
You're lucky you're here.
yeah. They told me that I would, well, at first they told me I probably wouldn't walk. And so I defied them on that. Then they told me I was going to be in a wheelchair in 10 years, because I had so much damage to my body and my back, and I'm not in a wheelchair yet. So I run around and have fun. I do normal stuff.
Do you exercise?
I used to. Now that I'm retired, I do. I had a weight set at my house, and I exercised all the time. That helped quite a bit.
Are you uncomfortable in the airplane when you fly?
No. That was another thing when I was at Wright Pat. First, my wife's a nurse, and I'm a bad patient. I hate hospitals. I hated hospitals ever since I was a little kid. I was just a bad patient, and so they came to me and they said, well, after I got out of ICU, I was in ICU for 2 weeks down there after they operated on me, and I was on morphine. And God, I love morphine. But the problem was perfect. My wife is a nurse, and she kept on telling me, give him more morphine, give him a drip you can control, because they would give me my morphine and only last for 15 minutes, and then for the next 45 minutes I had my finger on the button trying to get my morphine because the pain was so bad, and then they'd come in and give me another shot, and it would last 15 minutes, and so my wife said, just give him more morphine. You're not going to kill him. You can give him more, but they wouldn't do it. So when they took me out of ICU, they wouldn't give me any morphine on the floor, because you can only do a morphine drip inside ICU. So they came and gave me shots. So I said, give me the shots. So they would shoot me in the legs. I don't feel anything. I just get the morphine high, right? You get a little welt. I was feeling good for about another week. And then they ran out of space on the leg to shoot up morphine. Then they decided to shoot in my arms, and that didn't feel good at all. So I said, I think it's time I get off morphine. So then they gave me Percocet. So then I had Percocet like candy for a while, just to pop Percocet. And then I said, after I got back out and they sent me back here, I said, I don't want to do that anymore. I don't want to do the drugs. I want to do the heavy drugs. That's why I then started doing the more started heavy doses of that. I'd always carry that with me. I was on a 12-step program at that time, which meant I could go about 12 steps. Then I had to stop. So my kids were 9 and 7 at the time. So anytime I went outside the house, because initially I lived out of my place on Little Lake, and I would just be in a chair all day. I wasn't moving. In fact, my wife went and got me an attendant. And She hates that game, Mario Brothers. She can still hear that. Because I had nowhere to go, nothing to do, you know, I couldn't do anything. So I'd play, and you know what it is like out in Gwen with an antenna on your roof, right? Yeah. You get channel 6,
Yeah.
you know, channel 3, and then 2 PBS, and I don't watch PBS. So 2 PBS channels, and that's it. So, and Saturday Night Live came on Sunday afternoon, or Sunday night, right? It didn't even come on Sunday night. So, she gave me that game, and, but anytime I wanted to go outside and move, I had to have somebody with me. So, we called it the 12-step program. I'd walk outside, my kids would be with me. After about 12 steps, I'd have to stop. And then I'd walk into them, and then when the pain subsided, I would walk again. And that 12-step program got to more steps, but still, you know, I couldn't go very far without having someone assist me, or I would just have to stop walking for a while. And that went on for, I don't know, it's a long time ago, maybe about a year, 2 years. And just short distance. So,
What was your official retirement date of
April 4th,
of what,
89.
89? So you said you worked with the military doing computer stuff after, was that contractor?
Yeah, before I came up to Sawyer, I flew bombers at March Air Force Base in California and other places, and I was supposed to go fly A-10s, and somehow that assignment got mixed up, so I ended up in software development for warplanes up at SAC headquarters, because I was an engineer, I was a pilot, and I had worked computers, believe it or not, in the 60s in high school. There was a real smart guy in my school, and someone donated a computer, an IBM 1130 for him, and he was my best friend, so we were the computer geeks. I was also important for other stuff. We were the computer geeks guys, and so that got on my record somehow in the military. So they took me to warplanes, so I did software development for weapon systems and for warplanes for 4 years. And I brought you things like the ACM, the Advanced Cruise Missile, the software for the B2 and the B1. And then when I retired, and I was still in my body cast at Little Lake, I got a call from the headquarters SAC saying, hey, you know, we want you back. And so I went down and I worked at a GS job down there, but they weren't going to give me the grade I wanted. So I went contractor, and then I worked for 22 years. I worked as a contractor doing defense work for war plan development. In fact, the current war plan today is called SNAP, Strategic Nuclear Attack Plan. That's what I developed for them, the software, the algorithms for it.
So 22 years after 89?
22 years, yeah. I retired at 12. I worked for another company for a couple of years, and then I went down and worked down in Carroll. So I did that. I mean, you know, like I said, I'm an engineer by education, but I'm a software guy by training. You know, I took all the classes, did all the stuff myself, and did all the software development. And then the math parts, the writing algorithms, just came naturally. I think that's it, unless there's any more questions. I was about ready to say something, you asked me that question, I can't remember what it was. Oh, well.
I got one last thing, thanks for your service.
Yes.